In the depths of the Atlantic lies the wreck of the Titanic. But more than a century after the ship sank, new technology is shedding light.
Technology that's available now compared to what I did 20 years ago, I'm hopeful that this will have a positive outcome.
Over a century after its tragic sinking, the RMS Titanic continues to captivate our collective imagination. This maritime giant once declared unsinkable,
builder Thomas Andrews actually believed that Titanic was unsinkable.
Now rests nearly 12,500 feet below the North Atlantic surface, slowly surrendering to the relentless forces of nature.
Experts knew the Titanic's remains would eventually vanish.
Yet despite its inaccessibility, the Titanic's story remains unfinished. Recent developments suggest what was once thought impossible may soon become reality: the complete recovery of the Titanic.
I can't reveal the location of where I am. All I can say is that this warehouse is somewhere in Atlanta, because what's inside here? Thousands of items recovered from the Titanic, and every single one of them tells a story.
But what would it take to raise history's most famous shipwreck? And should we even try? This is the story of humanity's most ambitious salvage operation ever conceived.
My hopes are that they do a speedy recovery.
To understand the monumental challenge of recovering the Titanic, we must first confront the harsh reality of its current condition.
This latest dive produced startling pictures and a startling conclusion. The Titanic is rapidly returning to nature.
The once mighty ocean liner now exists in two primary sections, having broken apart during its descent to the ocean floor on that fateful night of April 14, 1912. The bow section, often featured in documentaries and films, remains relatively intact, while the stern section lies approximately 2,000 feet away, having suffered catastrophic damage during the sinking.
The ship has appeared frozen in time. A new team of divers has returned to the site. They found time has marched on.
Time has not been kind to this historic wreck. Since its discovery by oceanographer Robert Ballard in 1985, researchers have documented the Titanic's accelerating deterioration. Metal-eating bacteria known as Halomonas titanici, named after the ship itself, continuously consume the steel hull.
Bacteria that are actually eating into the metal,
creating rust formations called rusticles that hang from the structure like frozen waterfalls of decay. Recent surveys indicate that the ship is disappearing at an alarming rate.
And the worst case scenario is that within 10 years' time, Titanic could just be a rust stain in the sand on the bottom of the Atlantic.
The captain's bathtub, long a symbol for wreck divers, vanished in 2019 when the officers' quarters finally collapsed.
Captain's bathtub is a favorite image among Titanic enthusiasts, and that's now gone.
The crow's nest, where lookout Frederick Fleet first spotted the iceberg, has completely disintegrated. The forward mast has fallen, and the roof of the grand staircase dome has caved in. Scientists estimate that within 30 years, major sections of the wreck may be unrecognizable. The environment surrounding the Titanic presents its own set of challenges. Resting on the abyssal plain, the wreck experiences near-freezing temperatures, crushing pressure exceeding 6,000 pounds per square inch, and perpetual darkness. These conditions have preserved certain aspects of the wreck, like leather goods and some wooden items, but have accelerated the deterioration of the ship's metal components through electrochemical processes unique to this depth.
I think if we were to carefully raise her now, she could actually last for the next 500, 1,000 years, and she would probably be one of the major tourist attractions on the planet.
Previous recovery attempts. While the complete recovery of the Titanic remains unprecedented, numerous expeditions have ventured to the wreck site since its discovery, each pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the deep ocean. The first major recovery operation began in 1987 when EFREMA, a French oceanographic institution, and an American company called RMS Titanic Inc. joined forces. Using the submersible Nautila, they recovered over 1,800 artifacts.
All I can say is that this warehouse is somewhere in Atlanta, because what's inside here is incredibly precious. Thousands of items recovered from the Titanic,
including the ship's bell china plates and a section of the hull. This expedition established RMS Titanic Inc. as the wreck's salver in possession, a legal designation granting them exclusive rights to recover artifacts from the site. In 1996, controversy erupted when an expedition attempted to raise a large section of the Titanic's hull, known as the Big Piece.
It's the coolest artifact ever to be recovered from the wreck of the Titanic. This artifact is referred to as the Big Piece.
Weighing approximately 20 tons, this 15 by 25 foot section of the ship's starboard side had broken free during the sinking. The initial attempt failed when the lifting lines snapped during a storm, sending the artifact plummeting back to the seabed. 2 years later, in 1998, a second attempt successfully brought the Big Piece to the surface, representing the largest single piece of the Titanic ever recovered. The early 2000s saw technological advancements enabling more sophisticated operations. In 2010, an expedition mapped the entire debris field using autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with sonar and high-definition cameras.
Experts have used special technology to map the entire ship on the ocean floor.
This comprehensive mapping revealed thousands of previously undocumented artifacts scattered across a 3 by 5 mile area surrounding the main wreckage. Perhaps the most ambitious recovery attempt to date occurred in 2012, when RMS Titanic Inc. sought to retrieve the Marconi wireless telegraph, the device used to send the Titanic's distress signals. This expedition faced legal challenges from those who considered the radio room a grave site that should remain undisturbed. Though initially blocked by courts, a modified plan was later approved but has yet to be executed due to technical and financial constraints.
This week marks 113 years since the sinking of the Titanic. Now, there's a new tool for exploring it.
Technological breakthroughs. The dream of raising the Titanic is becoming increasingly plausible thanks to revolutionary advances in deep-sea technology. What seemed like science fiction just decades ago is rapidly approaching reality through convergent innovations in materials science, robotics, and lifting systems. The most significant breakthrough has come in the form of next-generation syntactic foam, a specialized material composed of hollow glass microspheres embedded in polymer resin. This advanced foam provides extraordinary buoyancy while withstanding the crushing pressures at the Titanic's depth. Engineers have developed a variant that's 40% lighter, yet 25% stronger than what was available during previous recovery attempts, creating unprecedented lifting capability. Complementing these materials are autonomous intervention systems that have transformed underwater operations. Modern remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, now feature haptic feedback, allowing operators to feel what the robot touches despite being miles above on a surface vessel. This tactile precision enables the delicate work required to secure lifting apparatus to fragile century-old steel. Additionally, Swarm Robotics allows multiple smaller ROVs to work in coordination, addressing the massive scale of the Titanic recovery challenge. Perhaps most revolutionary are the advances in 3D photogrammetry and structural analysis. Before any recovery attempt, the entire wreck can now be digitally mapped at millimeter-scale accuracy, creating a comprehensive virtual model.
It's like a crime scene. You need to see what the evidence is in the context of where it is, and you can see all the major pieces.
Artificial intelligence algorithms then analyze this model to identify structural weak points and determine optimal lifting positions. This data-driven approach dramatically reduces the risk of catastrophic structural failures during recovery. Power delivery systems have also seen remarkable innovation. Previous operations were limited by the energy that could be delivered through umbilical cables. New supercapacitor technology and high-density battery systems allow for unprecedented power at depth, enabling the operation of cutting tools, lifting mechanisms, and stabilization systems simultaneously. One system can deliver over 500 kilowatts of power at depth, enough to illuminate a small town, providing the energy needed for large-scale recovery operations. Communication barriers have likewise fallen. Traditional acoustic communication through water was slow and unreliable. New optical communication systems using modulated blue-green lasers achieve near real-time data transmission rates thousands of times faster than previous systems, allowing for immediate decision-making during critical phases of the recovery.
Technology that's available now compared to what I did 20 years ago, I'm hopeful that this will have a positive outcome.
The 2025 Recovery Initiative. The ambitious plan to raise the Titanic is no longer hypothetical. A consortium of maritime engineering firms, oceanographic institutions, and private investors has announced the Titanic Ascent project, scheduled to commence operations in the summer of 2025. a date carefully selected to coincide with optimal North Atlantic weather conditions. Led by Oceanic Ventures International, this $1.2 billion initiative represents the most ambitious salvage operation in maritime history. The project has secured funding from diverse sources: $450 million from private investors, $300 million from technology development partnerships, $200 million from advanced media rights, and the remainder from sovereign wealth funds interested in the project's potential to advance deep-sea engineering capabilities. The recovery strategy addresses the Titanic's fragmented condition by focusing on sequential recovery of the bow and stern sections rather than attempting to raise the entire ship as a single unit. This modular approach significantly reduces technical risk while preserving the historical integrity of the wreck configuration. The centerpiece of the operation is the specially designed vessel Lazarus, a 495-foot semi-submersible platform featuring dynamic positioning systems that can maintain station within inches even in challenging North Atlantic conditions. Currently undergoing final outfitting in Rotterdam, this vessel integrates lifting systems capable of controlled ascent for structures weighing up to 50,000 tons. Complementing this surface vessel will be 4 deep-sea work systems, 2 manned submersibles, and 2 advanced ROV platforms. The submersibles, Orpheus and Eurydice, represent the next generation of deep-diving capabilities, with operational endurance of 72 hours and manipulator arms that combine hydraulic power with unprecedented dexterity. The ROVs designated Worker and Surveyor will handle continuous operations when human presence isn't required. The project timeline reveals the methodical approach being taken. Phase 1 focuses on comprehensive site preparation, clearing debris, conducting detailed structural analysis, and installing stabilization frameworks around the bow section. Phase 2 in spring 2026 will see the actual lifting of the bow section using a combination of buoyancy modules and synchronized winching systems. Phase 3 targets the recovery of the stern section scheduled for summer 2026. Perhaps most innovative is the recovery methodology itself. Rather than traditional chains or cables which create point-load stress that could damage the fragile wreck, engineers have developed a distributed stress system using thousands of small connection points across the hull. This web-like arrangement distributes lifting forces across the structure, much like how floating ice supports weight across its surface. Engineering challenges. Raising the Titanic presents a perfect storm of engineering obstacles that have defeated previous attempts and continue to challenge even the most advanced recovery technologies. The first and perhaps most fundamental problem is structural integrity. After more than a century underwater, the Titanic's steel has been weakened by corrosion, microbial activity, and galvanic reactions. Computer models suggest the hull may retain as little as 30% of its original strength in certain critical areas. This degradation creates a paradoxical challenge. The structure is too fragile to lift using conventional methods, yet too massive to recover without applying significant force. Engineers must somehow distribute lifting stresses across the weakened hull without exceeding the material's remaining strength at any single point, a problem that has required entirely new approaches to underwater lifting mechanics. The pressure differential presents another formidable obstacle. The Titanic has existed in an environment with pressures exceeding 6,000 pounds per square inch for over a century. As the structure is raised, this external pressure will decrease, potentially causing trapped materials to expand and sealed compartments to rupture. To address this, engineers have developed a controlled decompression protocol using dynamically adjusted support structures that can compensate for these changing forces during ascent. Temperature variation compounds these challenges. At the ocean floor, the Titanic exists in near-freezing water around 203 degrees Celsius. As it rises through warmer water layers during recovery, thermal expansion will create additional stresses on the structure. Materials science experts have developed models predicting expansion rates for different components and designed compensation mechanisms into the lifting apparatus. Water current management presents yet another complex problem. Even modest currents can create significant lateral forces on a structure as large as the Titanic during ascent. The recovery system must therefore incorporate dynamic stabilization to prevent potentially catastrophic pendulum effects as the wreck rises through varying current layers in the water column. Perhaps the most daunting challenge is the sheer scale of the operation. The bow section alone weighs approximately 25,000 tons. Traditional salvage operations rarely attempt lifts exceeding 1,000 tons and never from such extreme depths. This necessitates not just incremental improvements to existing technology, but fundamental rethinking of deep-sea recovery methods. The proposed solution integrates multiple innovative approaches. First, a neutrally buoyant exoskeleton will be constructed around each major section of the wreck, providing structural support without adding weight. Second, a network of computer-controlled buoyancy devices will be attached to this framework, capable of generating up to 35,000 tons of lift. Finally, a synchronized tension system will maintain precise control during the entire ascent, adjusting in real time to changing conditions.
Thousands of items recovered from the Titanic, and every single one of them tells a story.
Preservation concerns. Once the monumental task of raising the Titanic begins, an equally critical challenge emerges: how to preserve this maritime time capsule once it's removed from its deep-sea environment. The preservation plan begins while the wreck is still on the seabed through a process called pre-conservation documentation, capturing the exact condition and position of every visible artifact using photogrammetry and 3D scanning technologies. As counterintuitive as it might seem, the immediate threat to the Titanic upon recovery isn't water exposure, it's air. After a century of adaptation to deep-sea conditions, contact with the oxygen-rich atmosphere would accelerate corrosion dramatically. To prevent this, engineers have designed massive containment tanks filled with deoxygenated water chilled to precisely match the conditions at the wreck site. The Titanic sections will be transferred directly into these tanks aboard specialized preservation vessels without ever breaking the water's surface. For metal components, particularly the ship's hull and machinery, the preservation team will employ electrolytic reduction, a process that reverses corrosion by passing a weak electrical current through the metal while it's immersed in a carefully formulated solution. This technique has proven effective with smaller Titanic artifacts but has never been attempted on such a massive scale. Custom-built treatment facilities measuring over 1,000 feet in length are being constructed to accommodate the ship's major sections. Organic materials present unique challenges. Leather items, wooden furnishings, and textiles that have survived in the oxygen-poor deep-sea environment will require specialized treatments. Conservators will use polyethylene glycol, PEG replacement therapy, a process that gradually substitutes the water molecules in these materials with a stable, wax-like substance. This technique, perfected during the conservation of the 16th century warship Mary Rose, prevents cracking and warping as artifacts dry. The ship's famous grand staircase, if recoverable, will undergo perhaps the most delicate conservation process. Its wooden components will require several years of controlled drying to prevent cellular collapse. Each carved element will be 3D scanned before treatment, creating a digital reference should any distortion occur during conservation. Paper items, from passenger documents to the ship's logs, represent some of the most historically valuable but fragile materials. These will be stabilized using vacuum freeze-drying techniques developed by the Library of Congress for flood-damaged archives. The process removes moisture while preventing the structural collapse that typically occurs during conventional drying. Perhaps most innovative is the plan for long-term display. Rather than attempting to fully dry and expose the entire ship, which would require continuous climate control, portions will remain in specially designed aqueous display environments. These transparent containment systems will maintain optimal preservation conditions while allowing public viewing, creating what will effectively be the world's largest museum artifact displayed in a controlled environment. Legal and ethical questions. The potential recovery of the Titanic raises a labyrinth of legal and ethical questions that extend far beyond technical feasibility. At the heart of these issues lies a fundamental question: who actually owns the Titanic? The legal status of the wreck exists in a complex international grey area. RMS Titanic incasses hold salvor in possession rights granted by United States federal court, giving them exclusive salvage rights, but not ownership of the wreck itself. The The 2020 agreement between the United States and United Kingdom regarding the Titanic site further complicates matters. This bilateral treaty establishes the wreck as a memorial site and restricts activities that might disturb human remains or artifacts. However, the agreement has limited international authority since major maritime nations like France, which has conducted previous Titanic expeditions, are not signatories. Additionally, the Titanic rests in international waters on the continental shelf claimed by Canada, creating jurisdictional ambiguity. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, shipwrecks in international waters remain the property of their flag state, in this case, the United Kingdom. However, insurance payouts after the disaster potentially transferred certain property rights to the insurers whose corporate successors might assert claims. Beyond legal ownership, profound ethical concerns surround any recovery attempt. The Titanic is the final resting place for approximately 1,500 people who perished in the disaster. While no intact human remains have been found due to ocean conditions, personal effects and areas where passengers were known to have died raise questions about whether the site should be considered a maritime grave deserving special protection. Cultural heritage experts remain divided. Some argue that recovering the Titanic would preserve a significant historical artifact that would otherwise be lost to natural deterioration. Others contend that the wreck should remain undisturbed as a monument to those who perished, with study limited to non-invasive methods. Indigenous perspectives add another dimension to this debate. Members of Mi'kmaq communities in Nova Scotia have expressed concern about disturbance of a site within their traditional maritime territories. Some tribal representatives have called for consultation rights regarding any major intervention at the wreck site. The economic aspects introduce additional ethical complexities. The potential commercial value of a recovered Titanic through tourism, media rights, and exhibition raises questions about profiting from disaster. Proposals for revenue sharing with descendants of victims or educational foundations have emerged as potential ethical frameworks for addressing these concerns. The scientific community has also raised questions about whether recovery might destroy valuable evidence about deep-sea ecosystems. The Titanic has become its own unique habitat, hosting specialized microbial communities that might be lost during recovery operations.
Titanic have been revealed by an exact 3D replica scan of the shipwreck.
Recent discoveries. What we know about the Titanic continues to evolve even after decades of study. Recent expeditions have yielded surprising discoveries that challenge long-held assumptions and provide crucial information for recovery planning. In 2019, a groundbreaking expedition conducted 5 manned submersible dives to the wreck, capturing the first 4K video footage in over 14 years.
And the first undersea expedition to the Titanic in 14 years. The underwater images tonight shot by dive team.
This high-resolution documentation revealed accelerating deterioration in key areas, including the collapse of the captain's quarters and significant erosion of the starboard hull near the grand staircase. Perhaps most surprising was the discovery of previously unidentified microbiological activity affecting the wreck. Scientists identified a new strain of metal-consuming bacteria that appears to be colonizing the hull at an accelerating rate.
Scientists say salt, currents, and bacteria have caused the hull to start to collapse.
These microorganisms adapted to the extreme pressure and cold of the deep ocean, are dissolving the steel up to 30% faster than models predicted just a decade ago. This finding has created new urgency around preservation efforts while simultaneously complicating recovery planning. In 2021, autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, equipped with advanced penetrating sonar, conducted the first comprehensive survey of areas within the ship previously inaccessible to exploration. This investigation revealed that the grand staircase, long thought to have floated away during the sinking, actually remains partially intact within the enclosed promenade area. The ornate woodwork has been preserved by the anoxic conditions inside the hull, representing one of the most significant intact interior features yet discovered. The debris field surrounding the main wreckage continues to yield insights. Mapping efforts in 2022 identified a previously overlooked section of the ship's keel approximately 800 meters from the main bow section. This 65-foot fragment appears to have separated during the initial impact with the seabed rather than during the surface breakup as previously thought. This discovery has forced a re-evaluation of the sinking sequence and provides valuable structural information for recovery engineers. Another significant finding came from sediment core samples collected around the wreck. Analysis revealed a distinct chemical signature in the surrounding seabed that appears to be accelerating metallic corrosion as the hull contacts the ocean floor. This phenomenon, possibly related to microbiological activity in the sediment, creates what scientists have termed contact point deterioration, a process that may eventually sever the connection between the bow section and the seabed. Advanced image analysis of the 2019 expedition footage also identified previously unrecognized patterns of structural stress. Computer modeling based on these observations suggests that the forward deck is experiencing progressive collapse that could accelerate dramatically within the next 5 to 7 years. This finding has become a key consideration in recovery timeline planning. Perhaps most poignant among recent discoveries was the identification of several intact suitcases and personal belongings preserved within unexplored sections of the ship. One particularly well-preserved leather valise still contains what appear to be personal papers and photographs. The existence of such fragile yet intact items highlights both the archaeological importance of the wreck and the ethical complexity of recovery efforts. The economic impact. The financial dimensions of raising the Titanic extend far beyond the immediate costs of the recovery operation itself. With the total project expenses projected at $1.2 billion, this would represent the most expensive maritime salvage operation in history, nearly 4 times the inflation-adjusted cost of building the Titanic itself. Yet the potential economic returns suggest this unprecedented investment could ultimately prove financially viable. Tourism represents the most significant revenue opportunity. Economic impact studies predict that a permanently displayed Titanic could attract between 1.5 and 2 million visitors annually. At projected admission prices between $35-$45 per visitor, direct ticket revenue alone could generate $60-90 million annually. Las Vegas, New York, London, and Tokyo have all been proposed as potential permanent exhibition locations, with some plans envisioning a purpose-built museum structure incorporating water features that simulate the original launch environment. Media rights constitute another substantial revenue stream. Major streaming platforms have already entered preliminary negotiations for documentary coverage of the recovery operation, with figures reportedly reaching $175 million for comprehensive rights. These agreements would include not only the recovery itself, but also the conservation process and eventual public unveiling. Pay-per-view special events showcasing key moments in the recovery could generate additional revenue through global broadcasts. Intellectual property licensing presents yet another economic dimension. Everything from detailed scale models to virtual reality experiences based on high-resolution scans of the recovered vessel could generate ongoing revenue. Educational curriculum development, traveling exhibitions, and merchandise could create a diversified income portfolio extending decades beyond the initial recovery. The project would also create significant employment opportunities. Beyond the 350 to 400 specialist positions directly involved in the recovery operation, thousands of jobs would be generated in museum operations, conservation, research, and associated tourism services. Economic multiplier effects could benefit host communities through increased hospitality, transportation, and retail spending. Research and technology transfer may represent less obvious but potentially significant economic impacts. Innovations developed specifically for the Titanic recovery, from preservation techniques to deep-sea engineering solutions, could find applications in offshore energy, underwater archaeology, and marine conservation. Patent licensing for these technologies could generate substantial revenue while advancing capabilities in multiple industries. Not all economic considerations are positive, however. Insurance costs for the operation are unprecedented, with specialized policies covering everything from operational failure to environmental damage. Legal challenges could also impose significant costs through extended litigation. Additionally, any recovery plan must include perpetual conservation funding, currently estimated at $8 to $12 million annually to maintain the ship once recovered.